Welcome, everyone. Good evening if you're in New York or in North America, and good morning if you're here in Japan or on this side of the date line. I'm very excited to welcome you to Monkey is Back. That is the launch event for the new issue of Monkey magazine, which I'm holding here. It's the only annual literary journal of Japanese literature and art published in English. Very happy to show you just a couple of pages here. This is actually work by Satoshi Kitamura, who is with us today to present kamishibai performance. And the magazine, as you can see, is in full color. It's also been reformatted. I'm a big fan of all the issues of Monkey Business that have been produced since 2011, but I'm particularly fond of this one because I think the physical format and the size of the magazine and the color are really extraordinary. Today, we're very excited to present to you, as I just mentioned, Satoshi Kitamura, who is an artist and an author, and who has lived not only in Japan, but also in the United Kingdom for a number of years. We also have with us today a wonderful writer, novelist, Hiroko Oyamada, whose work has appeared in a number of issues of Monkey and Monkey Business, and very excited to have a terrific short story by Hiroko in the new issue of Monkey, which she'll be reading from today. We're also very happy to have with us today scholar and translator, literary critic, David Boyd, who is joining us from North Carolina. And David has translated a number of the really the best writers coming out of Japan today, including, of course, Hiroko, but also, as you may know, Mieko Kawakami, and also Hideo Furukawa. All of those writers, I'm happy to say, are in issues of Monkey and Monkey Business. We also have a translator and scholar, Professor Hitomi Yoshio, who is with us right here in Tokyo from Waseda University. And very happy to say that Hitomi is also featured in the new issue of Monkey. And my name is actually Roland Kelts. I'm a contributing editor to Monkey and have been affiliated with the publication from the beginning. And I'm going to turn this microphone or this Zoom over to my good friend, the founding editor, literary translator, scholar behind this whole project, Professor Motoyuki Shibata.
Good evening, America. Good evening, good morning, Japan, and good afternoon to whoever that applies to. Look at these two magazines, almost twins, but not really identical. こっちが日本、This is the Japanese edition. こっちが日本版で、こっちが英語版。And this is the, oh, excuse me, someone has come. Right. Okay. And this Japanese edition appears 3 times a year. This English edition is going to be annual. But whatever the differences are, in both journals, we publish exciting fiction, poetry, and graphic stories. In the English version, naturally, our focus is on Japanese fiction, who we'd love to introduce to English-speaking readers. In our previous life as Monkey Business, we have published wonderful writers like Haruki Murakami, Hideo Furukawa, and Mieko Kawakami, Hiromi Kawakami, Yoko Ogawa, Hiromi Ito, Tomosaki Shibata. I mean, the list can be endless. We also, even in the English versions, we also have published English-speaking writers like Stuart Dybek, Barry Uagral, Rebecca Brown, Richard Powers, Paul Auster, Brian Evanson, etc. I'm one of the 3 editors of the English Monkey. The other 2 are Meg Taylor, who lives in Pittsburgh, and Ted Goosen, who lives in Toronto, and I live in Tokyo. And Roland is, as he said, our contributing editor. So the contributing editor means whenever there is something we don't know what to do, we ask him, and he knows what to do, or he knows someone who does, which is almost as helpful. We are also helped by our wonderful staff members. Tiffy Ferrantini is our marketing manager, and Kaori Drum is our website designer, and Sayaka Tomoka helps us with the publicity. As Roland said, we emphasize the visual in the new Monkey, and in this we had a great help from the office of Gilbert Lee, which is a wonderful design office in Canada. So I've gone on long enough. So let's give a microphone to Oyamada-san and then Boyd-san, David.
はい、おはようございます。皆さん、こんにちは。小山田博子と申します。今日はどうか、よろしくお願いいたします。Hello everyone, I'm Hiroko Oyamada. I'm very happy to take part in such a wonderful event and to meet you all online today. まずは、朗読からということですが、今回、こちらの、モンキーに掲載された、小説、緑菓子というものを今回ちょっとイベントの最初に、朗読をしようと思います。私は日本語でちょっとしばらく読みたいと思いますので、どうかお付き合いください。
So good morning, everyone. I'm Hiroko Oyamada. I'm very happy to be here today. First, I'm going to start with a reading from the new Monkey issue, and the title is Something Sweet. So I'm going to read the Japanese first, and David will follow with the English.
じゃあ、読みます。緑菓子。小学校が午前で終わった土曜の昼過ぎ、私は母と2人で祖母のお見舞いに来た。祖母は少し前に家で倒れ、救急車で運ばれてからずっと入院している。普段風邪をひいたりしたときは近所の住谷病院に行く。新しい方の道を通って家から車で15分ほどのこの大きな病院には、だから祖母が倒れて初めて来た。祖母は搬送された1週間後ぐらいには立ってトイレに行っていたし、ご飯も普通に食べていた。すっかり元気そうで、お見舞いに行くたび、どうして退院してこないのかが私は不思議だった。あれ、酒井さんとこの。病院に入ったところで、近所のおばさんとおじさんにばったり会った。手に大きな紙袋を持ってちょうど帰るところらしかった。こんにちは。母は頭を下げた。私も下げた。あ、おばあちゃんどがな？派手な大きな眼鏡をかけたおばさんが心配そうな顔を母に近づけた。おじさんはぼんやりした顔でどこかを見ていた。視線を追うと1階の待合室に設置してある小さいテレビに高校野球が映っていた。おかげさまでもう落ち着いて、翔英君は？それがね、病院の入り口のところには蘭の花がたくさん置いてあった。白やピンクの胡蝶蘭が多かったが、中には別の種類の蘭もあって、どれも偽物のように満開だった。枯れた花やしぼんだ花は一つもなかった。まあよかった。ほんまに大アホじゃ言うて、足に小ガニごついボルト一生入ったままなんじゃけ。花の下のところが壺のように膨らんで見える蘭に顔を近づけると、膨らんで滑らかな表面に私の顔がかすかに映った。顔を揺らすとちゃんと一緒に揺れた。大変ですね。お互い様ようね。ここだけの話、バイクのめげたん、見たけどあんだけの怪我で済んどるのは奇跡のようなかったわ。 これが薬で、バイクやらバカな付き合いやらやめてくれりゃええんじゃが。薄黄緑色の蘭の花の付け根に透明な蜜がにじんでいた。私は指で蜜をなすり取った。母はおばさんと向き合って熱心に話していた。おじさんはうつろな目で高校野球を見ていた。私は指を舐めた。花と埃の匂いがしてちょっとだけ甘かった。まーちゃんは偉いね。私はギクッと顔を上げた。おばさんは少し前かがみになって私に笑いかけていた。黒っぽい歯茎が見えた。おばあちゃんのお見舞いに来たんね。私はうなずいた。偉いね。かわいい孫の顔がおばあちゃんに一番の薬なんじゃけ。おい、おじさんが初めて声を出した。小がなところで引き止めとったら悪かろうが。行くで。ま、怒られち。おばさんはペロッと赤い舌を突き出してみせると、おばあちゃんによろしく、今度お見舞いに寄らしてもらいますけ、と言いながら病院を出て行った。母は頭を下げて見送った。自動ドアが開き、むわっとした外の空気が入ってきてしまった。祖母の病室は3階にある。母はエレベーターに乗った。エレベーターを降りるとナースステーションで、中で一人の看護婦さんが大きな赤ちゃんの頭くらいあるおにぎりをかじりながら書き物をしていた。
Something sweet. It was a Saturday afternoon, and elementary school had let out after morning classes. Mom and I went to visit Grandma. She fell at home a while ago. An ambulance came and took her to the hospital, where she's been ever since. Sumitani Hospital is closer, and that's where we go when I get sick, but they took Grandma to a bigger hospital, one we'd never been to before, about a 15-minute drive down the new road. A week or so after Grandma fell, she was able to stand up and go to the toilet on her own. She was eating like normal, too. She looked perfectly healthy to me. Every time we visited, I couldn't help but wonder why she hadn't come home yet. Well, look who it is. It's the Sakais. As we walked into the hospital, we ran into an older couple from our neighborhood. They were carrying large paper bags and were apparently about to go home. Hi, how have you been? Mom bowed. I did the same. The woman was looking at my mother through weirdly large glasses. Bringing her worried face even closer, she asked, "Oh, how's your mother-in-law? She's doing okay?" Her husband was staring off into space. When I turned to follow his gaze, I saw a tiny TV set up in the corner of the lobby. High school baseball. Much better, thanks. What about Shohei-kun? He's gonna be okay. There were orchids by the entrance, a lot of them. Most were moth orchids, some white and some pink, but there were other kinds too. All the orchids were in full bloom. It was like they were fake. Not one was dead or withering. I'm so glad to hear it. But he's a real bonehead. He's gonna have a huge bolt in his leg for the rest of his life. Looking closer at one of the plants, I noticed it was bulging near the bottom. I could see my own reflection in its smooth, swollen surface. As I tilted my head, my reflection tilted with me. Sorry to hear that. Same here. Well, just between us, I saw what happened to his motorbike, and it wasn't pretty. It's a miracle he didn't end up way worse. Maybe now he can put that death trap in his stupid friends behind him. Clear nectar was dripping down the stem of the pale yellow flower. I ran a finger up from the bottom, scooping it up. Mom and the woman were facing each other, absorbed in conversation, and the woman's husband was still watching the game with the same vacant look in his eyes. I licked my finger. It smelled flowery and dusty. The taste was a little sweet. Ma-chan's a real darling, isn't she? I jerked my head up. The woman leaned forward and flashed a grin at me. I could see the black of her gums. You came to visit your grandmother? I nodded. How sweet. There's really no better medicine than getting to see your granddaughter's pretty face. Come on, her husband spoke for the first time. We're holding them up. Let's get going. Oh no, looks like I'm in trouble. The woman stuck out her red tongue, then headed toward the exit saying, "Tell Grandma we'll stop by next time we come, okay?" Mom bowed again as we watched them go. When the automatic doors slid open, a blast of muggy air rushed in. Then they shut again. We got in the elevator to go to Grandma's room on the 3rd floor. When the door opened, we were facing the nurse's station, where a nurse was biting into a rice ball as big as a baby's head, writing something down with her free hand.
もうちょっと読みたいんですけど、さっきのところからちょっと話が飛んで、女の子は、お母さんにおばあちゃんと2人で話したいから外で時間を潰してくるように、時間を潰してくるように言われて病院の外に出ます。そのところを読みます。
So I'm going to skip a little bit and read the next section, but in between the girl is told by her mother to kind of occupy herself while she goes to talk with her grandmother. And so she steps outside.
病院の真裏には濁った丸い池があった。奥は雑木林のようになっていた。緑色で錆びたフェンスが取り巻いていて、雑草が池の縁ギリギリまで生えている。雑草には白い泡のような穂がついてなんだかネバネバして見えた。私はフェンスのそばまで行った。水草なのか物生えたゴミなのか何なのかわからないもしゃもしゃしたものがいくつも水面に浮かんで、その周囲に空気の泡がくっついていた。ポチッと小さい音がした。石でも投げ入れたような水の泡が池の端っこに広がりすぐ消えた。水の中に灰色の丸いものが見えた。あと思うと目の焦点があって、丸から尻尾が生えオタマジャクシになった。大きい。普通の田んぼなどで見かけるオタマジャクシの何倍もある。ピンポン玉より大きいくらいに見える頭には目と口らしきものまで見えた。目は少し盛り上がったように2つ、口には穴が開いている。これだけ水が濁っているのによく見えるなと思ったら、ただ緑色に濁っていると思った池は表面に透明な水の層があって、その下に濁った層があって、オタマジャクシはそのちょうど中間にいるようなのだった。息を吸うのか、オタマジャクシは時々縦になって水面に口をつける。その時水面には水の輪ができて広がってすぐ消える。下になった尾の方が動いて濁った水の層をかき混ぜて、透明な層に濁った水が巻き上がって一瞬混じる。縦になった時見えるオタマジャクシのお腹は銀色に光っていた。本当に大きい。はっとした。もしかしてこれはウシガエルのオタマジャクシだ。ウシガエルはうちの近所にはいないが、少し離れたところの川にはいて、夜、自転車で通りかかると襲われるという噂を聞いたことがあった。ウシガエルが牛のような鳴き声で鳴いている川のそばを、ライトをつけた自転車で通りかかると、その声が止むと、川の方からドタッと濡れた塊が飛んできて顔に張り付く。自転車ごと転んで地面に倒れると、同じような塊が川からドタドタゾロゾロ集まってきて、その人の顔をペロペロ舐めて食べてしまうのだという。防御策は顔を覆うヘルメットをかぶること。このオタマジャクシの大きさからしたらカエルはどれだけ大きいか。体当たりされたら自転車だってバイクだって倒れるかもしれない。林の方から一筋風が吹いて、それが池を2つに分けるように波立てた。ネバネバした方がフェンス越しに私の膝を撫でた。ポッと水の輪が広がった。ポッポッポッポッ。あちこちで丸い水門が生まれ広がり絡み合って消えた。これがすべてウシガエルの。ゾーッとした。
Right behind the hospital was a pond full of murky water with some kind of wooded area on the other side. Beyond the rusty fence surrounding the green pond were weeds that ran right up to the edge. The foamy white tips of the weeds looked like sticky fur. I walked up to the fence. I could see all these things floating on the pond, but couldn't tell if they were some sort of plant or algae-covered trash. Whatever they were, there were clusters of bubbles around them, and I could hear them popping from where I was standing. A ring spread out from the center of the pond, then vanished as if someone had tossed a rock in. In the water, I could see something round and gray. I squinted until I could make out what it was. A tadpole with a tail and everything. It was big, too big. This tadpole was easily several times bigger than the ones I was used to seeing in patties. Its head looked bigger than a ping pong ball. I even saw 2 eyes popping out and a hole for a mouth. I thought it was strange how I could see it so clearly when the water was this muddy, but there was a layer of clear water near the surface. The tadpole had to be swimming where the layers met. Occasionally, it lifted its mouth up out of the water, probably to get air, sending ripples across the pond that would vanish seconds later. Pointing down, the tadpole's tail kicked the green layer up from below, mixing it with the clear water for a moment. When the tadpole approached the surface, I could see its shining silver belly. Wow, it's big. Maybe it's a bullfrog tadpole. We don't have any bullfrogs where I live, but I know there are some living in a river not very far away, and I've heard that they attack people on bicycles when they ride by at night. If you get too close to the river with your bike light on, the croaks suddenly stop, and the next thing you know, some icky lump latches onto your face. One big ball of slime knocks you down, bike and all, then more and more of them creep out of the river to lick your face clean off. The best defense is supposed to be a helmet that covers your face. But look at the size of this thing, and this is just a tadpole. If a frog that large flew up at you, it would topple your bike like it was nothing. You could probably bring a motorcycle down. A blast of wind came from the woods, cutting across the water, making waves and splitting the pond in two. The sticky weeds brushed against my knees through the fence. Plop. Rings spread across the water. Plop, 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 plop. More rings rippling out, running into each other and disappearing. They're all... A chill ran through me.
来ていただいてありがとうございました。日本語でのタイトルは緑菓子で、英語ではサムシングスイートという短編の最初の方を読みました。
Thank you so much for listening to the reading. The Japanese title is Midorigashi and the English title is Something Sweet. And we both read as an excerpt from the beginning of the story.
で、今回は、この作品が、モンキーに掲載していただいたんですけれども、それを訳してくださったデイビッドさんと今から、作品とか翻訳についてちょっとお話できたらなと思います。
So this story was lucky to be featured in the new issue of Monkey. And today I'm happy to have a conversation with David Boyd, who is a translator, about this work and about translation.
デイビッドさん、おはようございます。すいません。なんか挨拶なしで急になんか私がいきなり読んじゃったのですいません。なんかデイビッドさんのちゃんと紹介もないまま始まってしまってすいません。
Sorry that I started with my reading without a proper introduction and also acknowledgement of David.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's fine.
今回のまず今読んだ作品についてとかちょっと訳した時の感じとかを伺えたらいいなと思うんですけど、訳してなんか私の作品を訳してくださるときに何か他の方の作品を訳すときと何かこう違う感じとかなんかこうよりおかしなところとか何かあったりしますか？
So David, I want to ask you a question. Could you tell me about your experience of translating this work and also my work in general? I know you translate a lot of different writers. So is there anything that's different about translating my work or something funny or strange?
Thanks for the question. I feel like I should be asking you questions, but I guess we'll start there. Yeah. So the first time that I translated your work was for Monkey Business a few years ago. And that was a really complicated story, I think, Lost at the Zoo. And that story was about the same length, maybe 10 pages, but it had 4 narrators. And they kept cycling through, right? So everyone's in the zoo. But you get it from very different perspectives. And that, I think, was really challenging for me. After that, translating The Factory, which only had 3 narrators, felt like a little bit of a break. I mean, I still think that one of the main points of The Factory was to create a sense of confusion between those 3 narrators. You and I have spoken about this in the past, and I'd love to hear you talk more about that today, if possible. And then after that, the work of yours that I translated was The Whole, for which you won the Kutagawa Prize. And in English, this just came out, right, in October. And the funny thing about that right now, if I can comment on that, and maybe we can circle back to this, is it coming out in 2020, people really can identify with Asahi's situation of kind of being stuck at home. The Whole came out in 2020, which is obviously a very strange year. And it seems like a lot of people, it didn't come out in 2020 in Japanese, but kind of by chance, it's now connected to this moment, right? So that's definitely changed the reading, but on the surface, it's a rather simple story compared to the factory, one narrator. So the first story of yours that I translated after the whole was this one, right? Something Sweet. And it's the first time translating a single narrator of yours who is a child, right? I mean, this is from the perspective of a younger girl. So there were definitely new things to consider, but there was also one component of this story that I feel is true with everything of yours. Yeah, there's just, but there's, more importantly, there is one thing that goes through all of her work that I am always thinking about. And this is something that I don't really think as much about when translating other people, which is just, I don't want to put too much of myself in it. Yeah, there's in everything that you write, I always feel like a lot of the stories are implied, but not really written out. And I'm trying to respect that, remembering to keep that as something that's hinted but not directly spelled out actually requires a lot of energy. So I would maybe put that in these terms. There's always a danger of filling in the blanks, and with all of these stories, but especially Something Sweet, the blanks are really the story, and filling them in would be very dangerous. So I hope I didn't fill in the blanks too much, but now I'd like to turn the tables if possible and ask you about those blanks in the story.
そうですね。一番は語り手にも分かっていないんだと思うんです。書かれてないことは。
Yeah, so I think the first thing to think about is that the narrator herself doesn't realize that there are blanks, that she doesn't completely understand everything that's going on.
私は小説家になって、ちょうど今年で10年だったんですけれども、その最初の時は意識をしていなかったんですけど、最近自分の書き方っていうものがちょっとこうある程度こう法則というか、いつもこういうふうに私は書くんだなっていうのがちょっと思うようになってきたことがあるんですけど。
So it's been about 10 years since I became a writer, and in the early years I wasn't so conscious of how I write or my particular style, but these days I've come to realize that I do have some kind of not so much a rule, but a habit or some kind of style that I'm conscious of.
それはいつも何かを思い出して書いてるっていうことなんですね。
And that I might put it as I'm always writing by remembering something.
で、ほとんどのことが実際に私、作品のナレーターじゃなくて書き手の私自身がどこかで経験したか、例えば見たこと、あるいは噂話で聞いたこととかっていうその現実の経験が常にその出発点にあって。
So at the root or the beginning of most of what I write, they're based on things that I myself as the author have experienced or heard through gossip or some kind of personal experience.
でそのことを思い出して書いているうちに語り手が私でなくなっていって、で実際にはなかったことを思い出していくっていうその思い出したことを書く。例えば夢を日記につけるようなイメージですかね。まあ、本当の日記でもいいかもしれない。日記を書くようなイメージで常に自分は書いてるんだと。
So there's always the process of remembering, and as I'm remembering and writing the story, the I as the author turns into the narrator. And so when that takes over, when the narrator takes over the story, then the narrator starts remembering things that actually didn't happen. So it's almost like trying to keep a diary from a dream.
で、当然なんですけど、現実に起こったことをすべて解釈したり、理解をしたり、こうすることっていうのは誰にもできないと思うんですけど、それと同じで、私もあったことを一生懸命思い出して、で、その時に私が覚えていることをできるだけいっぱい書こうとして思い出して書いてる。でもその意味や理由は分からないことが実は多くて、そういう書き方を自分はしてるんだと。 で多分そういう書き方しかできないんだというのを自覚したのが割とこう最近のことというか最近そういうのを自覚するようになったんです。
And so it's hard for anyone to kind of interpret and understand what's happening in real life as they happen. And I'm the same. I'm always trying to remember and write down as much as possible, but I don't exactly know what those memories or actions necessarily mean. And I realized that as a writer, that's part of my limitation. Yeah, and also my style. I've only very recently come to realize that about myself.
そのことがおそらくいろんなことが暗示であったりほのめかしのように説明されずに空白になっているということの一番大きな理由はそのせいだと思います。
So maybe that explains what David you called the blanks, or what is hinted at or insinuated, why that is such a big part of my work.
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering about that sort of evolution, and evolution is a strange word to use when describing your work, I think, for numerous reasons, but it's always animal life at the margins at a minimum. I was just kind of thinking about the factory and the whole. I'd like to ask her about the factory and the whole and the trajectory between those books, I suppose. So I was wondering about this recently. So in the factory, there are three types of animals in the periphery, and they all have names. And more recently, when working on the whole and thinking about this unnamed creature at the center of it, which kind of lines up, right? Because in the factory, they do all have names, very specific names, kind of as if they're species specific to that factory setting. So I was wondering if there was something that made you move from naming the animals to not naming the animals, seeing if leaving things unnamed or kind of an unnameability is so important to a lot of your work.
はい、工場に出てくる動物っていうのは3つ出てくるんですけど、最も重要なのは工場羽っていう鳥が、最もこう作品全体に関わってくる生き物なんですけれども。
Yeah, so yeah, there are three animals that appear in the factory, but the most important one is the bird that becomes kind of central to the story.
この鳥は私は工場で働いてたことがあるんですけど、実際その時に工場の中で一回本当にその鳥を見たんですね、実際に。
So I myself have the experience of having worked at a factory, and it was actually my own experience that I saw a bird there when I was working.
工場の機械の中で女性が大きなすごく大きな鳥、黒い鳥を羽交い締めにしているのを見たんですね、一回。
So inside the factory, in one of the huge machines, I saw a woman kind of tackling or wrestling with a big black bird.
ただそれは私の本当は見間違いで、彼女は大きな機械の部品を抱え上げただけで、それが一瞬鳥の羽に見えただけだったんです。だから実際にそれは見てないんだけれども、私の中で工場の中で黒い鳥が従業員に抱えられて運ばれているのを見たっていうのは、ある意味本当の経験として私の記憶に残っているんです。
But in fact, it was my mistake. I thought I saw a woman carrying this big bird, but she was actually just handling a big machine. But this mismemory, this misviewing became part of my memory. And so in my mind, I saw a woman carrying this big bird inside the factory.
で、私はその時すでに工場の作品を書き始めていたんですけれども、その時にこの私が今書いている工場についての文章はこの 今私が見た鳥についての文章なんだっていうものがこうその時すごくこう確信したんですね。
So when I had this experience, I was already actually in the process of writing the factory. But when I saw that, I came to realize that what I'd been writing was exactly what I had just kind of misseen.
なので私にとって鳥っていうものはすごくこう具体的だし、はっきりしているし、名付けずにはいられないものだったんですね。それは工場っていう小説を小説にするためには、その鳥のことを私はものすごく考えなきゃいけなくって、で当然ながら存在しない実際にはいないその鳥のことを分かろうと思って、でも実際に鳥の図鑑を集めて一生懸命こう探してみたり、似た鳥を探したりして自分の中でそれを、信じ込んで本当だって思ってことが工場を書き上げるためにすごく必要なことだったんです。
So for me, the image of the bird was so concrete that I couldn't help but name the animal, the bird. And so in order to make the factory into a novel, I had to continue thinking about the bird and try to understand this bird. And so I would study books, trying to find, the exact image, the exact species, the type. And I had to really make myself believe that this bird existed and was part of this world.
対して穴に出てきた黒い獣はもうまた私は小説を書いて穴につながる小説を書いているときにどうしてもうまくこう話が進まなくなったところがあってかなり分量を書いてたんですけど、その時にその時は夢を見たんです。本当に夜見る夢を。
And in contrast, to talk about the unnamed creature in the hole, I was writing the novel, and at some point I came to kind of a block, like a writer's block, and then I had a dream.
その夢の中で黒い獣が河原で穴を掘っているっていうものをはっきり私はその夢で見た時に、その目覚めた時にあの獣のことを書けばまたなんとかなるんだっていうのが思ったんですけど、それはやっぱり夢のものだからそんなにこう私にとってもよりわからないままこうわからないままだったんですね。わからないままの方がいいというか。
And in that dream, there was a black creature that was digging a hole by the river. And when I woke up, I thought, oh, well, I should write about that in the novel. But I didn't understand what that meant, what the significance of the creature was, what the significance of that image was. But it was okay not to understand.
わからないことが重要というか、獣については。
So it was actually more important that I didn't understand completely about this creature when writing the story.
Okay, thank you so very, very much, Hiroko and David, for the wonderful reading of really extraordinary short story, which is in the new issue of Monkey, Something Sweet, which is actually very much about the color green, which is great because the new issue of Monkey is very green. And speaking of color, I'm really excited to turn the program over to visual artist and author Satoshi Kitamura. As I mentioned from the beginning, Satoshi's new graphic story, manga, if you will, featured in this issue is called The Heart of the Lunchbox. His new books include Millie's Marvelous Hat and Once Upon an Ordinary School Day. I just want to mention I've known Satoshi for a few years now, and I find his work absolutely magical, and it's really wonderful to present him to you today as part of Monkey is Back.
Good evening and good morning. I show you this story I did for Monkey this time, the Heart of the Lunchbox. Yes, this is the trailer for this story in this new Monkey. Okay. Monkey presents the Heart of the Lunchbox, お弁当の奥深く。The trailer 予告編。Shota has a problem. Shota は困っていました。His lunchbox is not as sumptuous as his classmates. 翔太のお弁当は同級生たちみたいな豪華なお弁当ではありませんでした。It's too plain. なんだかとっても素朴なお弁当でした。Sometimes they tease him about it. 時々みんなにからかわれるのです。But Shota can't ask his mother to make a lunchbox like theirs. でも翔太はお母さんにみんなと同じようなお弁当を作ってと頼めませんでした。She's far too busy. 彼女は忙しいから。She works every day. 彼女は毎日働き詰めです。After a walk in the park one Sunday, mother tells her son, 日曜日に公園に散歩に行った帰り、お母さんは翔太に言いました。I'll make a special lunchbox for you for tomorrow. 明日特別なお弁当作ってあげる。It will be so special. You'll remember it for the rest of your life. とっても特別なお弁当だから一生忘れないわよ。So when Shota opens his lunchbox, 翔太がお弁当を開けてみると、he opens the door to the world of the unknown. お弁当箱を開けてみるとそこは未知の世界が広がっていました。With full of mystery, そこには謎があり、アドベンチャー、冒険があり、ディスカバリー、発見があり、ミザリー、悲しみがあり、そしてデンジャー、危険がありました。Don't miss it. 乞うご期待。Now available at bookstores near you. 近所の書店でお求めください。あるいは、ここでネットでどうぞ。以上です。はい。見えましたか？はい。では、次はちょっとコマーシャルブレイク。This is my new book, which came out in August in UK and October in Japan. And it's coming out in US, America in, I think, April, by the publisher called The Peach Tree. This is a story about a boy who goes to the market to buy something for himself for the first time. And he walks around in the market trying to find things to buy. So there's lots of scenes of the market stores and so on. And he tried to find things to buy, like musical instruments or hat. But something, accident happens. And later he finds a smile shop. And so on. Anyway, I shouldn't read all the story. Anyway, this is a commercial break. And finally, I'll show you another kamishibai story. This one is many years ago when Moto asked me to go to America with him for a monkey business tour. Moto asked me to bring the kamishibai to this tour in America. But then I realized the audience are not children this time in America. So I made up this story for adults audience. The Cave Talks という題です。話はとってもシンプル、単純です。It's a very simple story about a man walking in the woods. 一人の男の人が森の中を歩いています。すると急に風が強くなって雨が降り出します。The rain started and it became windy, so he ran to look for a shelter. So 彼は走って森の中を走って雨宿りするところを探しました。And he found a cave. And he entered. And as he walked, そして彼が歩いていくと he found something very interesting. The animals are painted on the wall. 動物が壁に描かれています。それもたくさんの。There are so many. And then it started to walk. They started to walk. 動物たちは歩き始めました。And they ran towards the depths of this cave. 動物たちはどんどん洞穴の奥の方に走り去っていきました。Then they came back, but this time they are birds. 今度は鳥になって戻ってきたと思ったら、then again they flew away into the darkness.はい、以上です。はい、どうもありがとうございました。Thank you very much.
We did our first launch back in October, I think, and he created this obento bako lunchbox. Satoshi did. Very traditional Japanese lunchbox. You have a Milky Way here, and inside. This happened to be, I mean, the day we did the launch happened to be Meg Taylor, our editor's birthday. So this was Satoshi's present for Meg. Happy birthday again, Meg.
Okay. Yes. Shall I talk about something or?
Sure, go ahead.
Yes. this one I wrote for the new monkey, the heart of the lunchbox. I had this idea for many years as a children's story, and I tried again and again, but I couldn't finish it for some reason. I don't know why, but I was thinking it as a kind of family story with mother, father, and son. But this time I just took the father out, then it worked. I don't know why, but somehow it worked as a single mother family story. And that was very interesting to me.
Roland?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe we should start addressing some of the questions from the audience. Satoshi, since you're here, I'll start with you. One of the questions, which actually I wanted to ask you, is generally, what is your process for starting a story? When you come up with an idea, do you start with a sketch, or do you usually start with a sentence or with a character? How do you begin working on a project?
It's a difficult question because I don't remember most of the time how it starts. But this one, Smile Shop. I was in Mexico. I was sort of trying to learn a bit of Spanish. And then I came up with this word, sonrisa, which is smile. And somehow I made up this word, sonrisalia, the shop, smile shop. And I quite liked it. So I wanted to write it in Spanish first, but I can't write Spanish. So I ended up writing in English. I made a rough sketch in Spanish. It's a sort of complete story, shorter version of this one. So, so this is a sort of the one word, which, even though it's not a right word, it's a kind of invented word, became a book. Or sometimes just an image, or maybe 2 or 3 things. I think you can't make a book with just one idea. You need about 2 or 3. So I have some good idea for a long time, but it didn't make any, didn't make it a book just by one. And then I come up with something else. Then if these 2 things come together, then somehow it becomes a story. Does it make sense?
はい、ありがとうございます。はい。I've been taking a look at your questions, and some concern themselves about the way the dialect in Oyamada-san's story works. And some of them asked David about how he, went about translating the dialect. So I'd like to ask you two about the dialect. First, Hiroko.
はい。私は、ずっと日本の中では、大きいとも小さいとも言い難い地方である広島にずっと生まれも育ちも今の居住地も広島っていう生活をしています。
I was born and raised and still live in a city called Hiroshima, which is neither too big nor too small of a city in Japan.
どちらかというと私は広島の中では田舎の方に住んではいるんですけれども、ですので私にとって実は会話っていうものはフォーマルな場所で、話す以外は基本的に私は広島弁という方言の話者なんですね。
And I live in the rather countryside of Hiroshima, and so for me, conversations or any kind of dialogue takes place in Hiroshima dialect. Unless I'm speaking in a really formal occasion, I'm speaking in standard Japanese. Hiroshima dialect is what makes up my world.
ただそれを小説に書くかどうかというのは割と、自分の中ではチューニングがかなり変えているところがあって、今回読んだ緑菓子はおそらく完全な正しい広島弁を 会話文に全面的に使った作品としては、おそらく、唯一までいかないけど、かなり珍しいものです。私はどちらかというと、方言じゃない会話の方をおそらく多く書いていると思います。
So whenever I write a story, I'm always conscious of kind of whether I use dialect or not, and if I do, of fine-tuning how to write in the written form. And so I think this story might actually be the only story that I've featured the kind of correct Hiroshima dialect, or that's kind of dominant within the story. I've written more stories that don't use the dialect than stories that uses the dialect.
というのは、日本語で読んでも、広島弁を字で書くと、やっぱりちょっと違うんですね。やっぱり方言は喋るための言葉ですから、書くと、おそらく広島弁話者じゃない人には、私の意図が完全に伝わらないところが多々あると思っていて、で、おそらく今回の緑菓子の会話ぐらいだったらおそらくほぼ正確に伝わると思うんですけど、大体の場合はもうちょっとこう、配慮した書き方をしないと、ちょっと本当に意味を字で書くと取ってもらえないところがある。
So the problem with dialects is that when you write it down in the written form, it already kind of changes shape and it feels very different to the reader. It doesn't, the dialect aspect doesn't really get conveyed properly because I think that dialect is a spoken form of language. It's a very oral form. So even if I try to write it down as accurately as possible, it often doesn't get communicated properly to the reader. But I tried to do this the best I could in this story, Something Sweet, and perhaps because of its length and the content, I think it worked this time. But in most cases, I find that you have to somehow cloak it or hide it or transform it in a way for dialect to be conveyed properly.
時々は人工的に私が作った方言を会話に使うこともあります。つまり字で読んで意図が理解してもらえる架空の方言。時々それを東京の方なんか読むと、これは広島弁なんですねっておっしゃることもあるんですけど、全然もういろんな地方、私の地方、あと夫はまた別の土地の出身なので、夫の地方、親戚が住んでいる地方がごちゃ混ぜになって、でさらにもうちょっとチューニングをした方言を使うことがもあります。それはやっぱり読んでわかるために、です。
So I often actually create these artificial dialects that make sense only when it is written down. And so Tokyo readers would read my story and say, you're writing in the Hiroshima dialect. But actually, it's often a mix of different types of dialects. My husband is from another region of Japan. My relatives live in different regions. So I often kind of mix a lot of the dialects together and invent this fantasy dialect that actually doesn't exist, but it gives the impression of a very rooted regional dialect when put into the story. But it requires a lot of mixing and fine-tuning on my part.
ただ
どうぞ。
緑菓子は広島弁なので、ぜひそのあたりはデビッドさんにどういうふうに思われたか、どういうふうに訳されたのかを私からもお聞きしたいと思ってました。すみません、柴田さん。
But Something Sweet is written purely in Hiroshima dialect. And so I also would like to ask David how he went about translating that.
Thanks for the question. I spend way too much time thinking about this question. Not just about this story. I mean, 99% of the time I'm thinking about co-translating breasts and eggs. When I'm thinking about translating dialect, I'm thinking about Kawakami Miyako, typically. As a translator of breasts and eggs, right? Kawakami's book, this is a problem that I've thought a lot about. how to handle dialect. So I can't give a full answer here because my interpreter will hate me for the rest of our lives if I give the full answer. Would start by saying English is English, so you can't really do that much with it. Or if I could just adapt something that Kawakami herself said to me when we were talking about breasts and eggs, adapting it because she said there's no such thing as Osaka Ben in English. I would say there's no such thing as Hiroshima Ben in English either. This statement is not me giving up. It's just a fact. That's a point of departure, not a conclusion. So when translating the woman in the hospital, for example, I'm thinking about her largely as a character. I'm thinking about translating her age. And as Oyamada-san just said, the most important thing may be just how spoken it is, that you want it to sound spoken, while fully recognizing that it's difficult to get even dialect across in Japanese, that it may not actually translate well from the spoken Japanese to written Japanese. So I'll just say one more thing about that, which is when Sam Bett and I were translating Natsumonogatari, when we were translating Breasts and Eggs, we conceptualized this as there's inside dialect and outside dialect. By which I mean, if we translate something, if we take it to kind of a maximum effect, that we've taken something that, as Oyamada-san just said, you know, she grew up there. This is her dialect. It's probably very natural. I mean, outside of formal spaces, this is how one speaks. Therefore, do we want to maximize that in English and basically otherize it? Or do we want it to read like the most natural, most spoken thing? So in this sense, we were considering, I would say that this too, like with Breasts and Eggs, we're talking about inside dialect. The idea is to find the most natural voice possible. Maybe not the most naturally written language, but the most natural language to be spoken. And for me, it gets caught up in largely with character. I think about it a lot with character because, I mean, we have to make it work in English, right? I do think we have to work within the target language to make that work. Yeah. Sam is currently explaining actually how this works very well in the chat. So let's go ahead and read that out loud. Sam says insider dialect, so not inside, but insider dialect, a dialect that works inclusively, making the speakers sound natural to the readers, and outsider dialect, a dialect that shuts out readers, working like a secret code or private speech pattern. The danger is always making it sound cartoonish and gimmicky, if you do dialect for dialect and so on.
Okay. はい。ありがとうございます。はい。Simple, great question for Satoshi. My son wonders how you come up with silly ideas for children's books.
Because I'm a silly person, so whatever I think, it becomes silly ideas. あともう一つのがあって、there are two directions, the opposite direction goes, one kamishibai goes this way and the other this way. So originally, my cave kamishibai, original one was the opposite direction. But then Moto asked me to, he wants it to use the book. I use that kamishibai in the Japanese monkey. And Japanese monkey starts from this side, not this side. So it's going this way. So I made the second version of the cave kamishibai in the opposite direction. And this new one is better than the original one. So I've been using it since.
はい、ありがとうございます。Thank you so much. Roland, would you like to pick a question or a question from yourself?
Yeah, there's a question that was asked of Satoshi. Fairly simple. What would you have changed if you chose to set the story in Mexico?
I've been to Mexico many times, and I really like the Mexico, but I never lived there. So I don't know enough about Mexico. So it's not easy for me to make it in a Mexican setup. But if I had a chance to live there, maybe I'd have done it in the Mexican scenery. Yeah, it could have been done in any country, but because my primary publisher is English publisher, so I tend to use more English kind of sceneries. And also I'm a bit nostalgic because now I live in Japan, so I'm a bit nostalgic about the London I used to live. And I used kind of the typical London market scenes.
Could I ask another question?
Sure, please.
I'd like to ask Hiroko about your experience as a Japanese writer, having your work translated into English. Two novels, especially as David mentioned, The Factory and The Whole, are now out in English.
私は先ほども申しましたように、だから広島っていう日本の中でも田舎に住んでいて、それでまあ細々とというか、ちょっとずつ自分の周りのことを書いてるつもりなんですけれども、それがこう翻訳されて、英語っていう特に人口がすごく多い、使用者が多い言語に訳されて、いろんな方に読んでもらってるっていうのが、実はまだあんまりこうちょっとまだ夢みたいっていうか、不思議なくらいちょっとすごいことだなっていうふうに思っています。
Like I said before, I live in a countryside, outside of Hiroshima, and I often write about what's around me, the landscape, the happenings, and so to think that my work has been translated into English that's spoken and read all around the world, it still seems a bit unreal to me, like a dream.
で私は英語がそんなにわからないんですけれども、わからないなりにこうちょっと日本語とデイビッドさんが訳してくださった文章をこう見比べていると、やっぱり単に言葉が違うだけじゃなくて、ちょっと切れてるところだったり、あと会話文に日本にはないびっくりマークがついていたり、やっぱりいろんなことが日本語よりやっぱりクリアに書かれていることが多いと思うんですね。英語の方が言葉がちょっと補われていたり、そういうので日本語と英語っていうものが実は全然知ってたんですけど、やっぱ全然違うんだなっていうのも改めて思いましたし、でそのことによって今まで私が読んできた海外文学が訳され、誰かが訳したもので、それを、ある意味日本文学のように読んできたわけなんですけど、それがいかにこう描きたくて、そして奇妙で面白いことだったかっていうのを初めて自分のことのように痛感もしました。
So I'm not fluent in English by any means, but I've tried to compare my original work and the translations by David. And I have noticed differences between the two. Some parts there are extra explanations added, or for example, exclamation marks. And I feel that English in general is a little bit more clear, a little bit more explained than the Japanese. So it's really made me conscious of the difference between the two languages, between Japanese and English. And I grew up reading translations of foreign books, and I've never really thought about the fact that they were translated. I've just kind of read them as if they were written in Japanese or a part of Japanese literature. But now that I've become aware of translation, I'm realizing what a marvelous and rare experience it was to have been able to read all of these books in translation.
翻訳って運もあるから良かったなと思います。ごめんなさい、またかぶっちゃった。すみません。いい翻訳者の方、いい翻訳者っていい悪いじゃなくて、こう訳そうと思ってくださる翻訳者の方がいて、でそれを何かに掲載してくれよ、出版してくれよっていう編集者の方や出版社の方がいてっていうのは、自分の能力とか努力をちょっと超えたところにあるので、すごく自分が運がいいなっていうのも日々デビッドさんだけじゃなくて他にもルシー・ノースさんとか、ジュレット・ウィンターズ・カーペンターさん という方に短編も訳していただいたことがあるんですけど、そういうこうご縁すべてが本当にありがたいなっていうふうに思っている次第です。すいません、またかぶってしまいました。
So I feel incredibly lucky that my work could be translated into English and reach a wider audience. It's not only the translators that are willing to translate my work, but also so much effort put in by editors and publishers. And so much of this is kind of beyond my control or my power or even my ability as an author. And there are, aside from David, there are other translators like Lucy North and Juliet Winters Carpenter who have kindly translated my work. And I'm so grateful to all of them.
Will this webinar come back, hopefully, in near future? I hope we will.
Yeah, I think I won't say too much, but we have another event coming together for our hosts in Indonesia. So of course we're not going to Indonesia, but will be transmitted. So we do have some other events coming up. We'll announce.
Do you have a fixed date for that event?
Yeah, that'll be on the 17th of December.
We'll be having Satoshi again and Hiromito, right?
Yep. So I just want to add in the chat, if you've got the chat open, you'll see that our host has been posting the websites where you can get copies of the new issue of Monkey. It's available in digital formats, EPUB, I don't know all the formats, Kindle, whatever. And it's also available now in print just about all over the world, I think. Is that right, Moto?
Yeah, almost, yes. このモンキーはウェブサイト、モンキーのウェブサイトで購入していただけます。で、紙版もありますし、それから、電子版もあります。この現物の、日本で印刷したので、それをアメリカまで船で送りました。で、船が先日到着しました。で、そこからまたモンキーの、ティフのところのマーケティングマネージャーのオフィスについて、そこで販売できるようになりますので、もうじき紙版も、アメリカでもご購入いただけます。はい。
All right, so I think that is about a wrap for tonight. So I want to also extend a warm thanks to Mitsu for hosting this at Ignition Gallery here in Tokyo. It's really grateful to him for hosting our event. And does anyone want to add anything before we go? And I think we also, I should mention, we had a previous event in October. That was when the publication first launched here in Japan. The issues were printed here in Japan, so we had them here first. And we're going to post a link to the YouTube video of that event, which you can also check out, which featured, can't remember who was there. Satoshi was there. Moto was there. Who else did we have?
Shibasaki-san was there.
That's right, Tomoka Shibasaki. And
was there.
Hideo
Furukawa.
And Hideo Furukawa, that's right. Amazing readings. Sorry, I'm just senior moment here. But yeah, that video is going to be posted and you can access it on YouTube.
Yeah, I just put the link, the YouTube link.
Right.
Thank you. So I want to just once again thank you very, very much for joining us this evening or this morning, wherever you might be, and to thank obviously Hiroko Oyamada, Hitomi Yoshio, David Boyd, Satoshi Kitamura for joining us here and presenting to you this this wonderful entertainment, really, this terrific event. ありがとうございました。どうも。Thank you.
Thank you.